Hello, I'm Joe,
And I'm Ricky.
and this is episode 14 from season 3 of the Beer and Broadband podcast. It should come out on September 21st, 2020. And we are going to talk about another one of the things that I tried to experiment with over the break that we did, specifically a ginger beer that I made, which I'm fairly happy with. It's another one of those things that I made that ended up being pretty okay. It well, at least met what I was trying to do, which was have a very strong ginger citrus kind of flavor to it. So hopefully you're trying it and you'll be able to tell me a little bit about what you think of it.
hmm Sorry, I was in the middle of taking a sip.
That's okay.
Oh, it's not too bad. Sorry, I'm going to go in for a second one.
Okay, you go ahead. I was taking a sip to remind myself of what that tastes like. So um, before I start kind of rambling on, I'll give you some of
hmm
the facts about it. So it is using Safel SO4. I made 1 gallon. It started out at 1.04 and then dropped down to um, about 0.99 before I stopped. So it's about a 6.5 ABV. And then I dropped some carbonation tabs into each bottle to get them to carb. So the found was on a website, and I don't remember what the
hmm
website was. Normally, I cite my sources, but if I find it out, like I'll put it back in. I don't remember where I got it from, but it's basically 2/3 of a cup of ginger. So I grated it
hmm
up, and then I put a cup of sugar, a third of a cup of lemon juice, and a third of a cup of lime juice, a teaspoon of cream of tartar, and I added that all to a pot and cooked it for a
hmm
bit. And then after I cooked it out, I strained it out and then poured it into the gallon jug with what was left of the water, and that's what created that strong like citrus and ginger flavor.
Gotcha. I'll be honest, this is not bad. I know you told me to be prepared to sweeten it. I don't think it needs to be sweetened, in all
Hmm.
honesty. As somebody who drinks a lot of ginger beer from a lot of different companies, like I grab just anything I can whenever I see it in
Hmm.
the store. Some things, like the ones you can find at like Harris Teeter, or like the one that we tried, I think like 2 years ago now when we went to the it was either the
Science of
wine, Science of
beer.
Wine, or
Science
Science
of
of
beer.
Beer. Yeah,
Yep.
that one was severely sweet compared to most. And, that's what most people like. So
Right.
I understand that. But most of the ones I drink are less sweet than this. Or
Hmm.
really, I guess the sweetness, the dryness is probably close to the same, but there's a lot more ginger. I don't think the lemon lime is bad in this,
Hmm.
but I'll say from someone who drinks a lot of it, I want more of that ginger. I would almost double the ginger you have in it because you want that heat.
So I am going to try a different method the next time I make the same thing, where I actually add the ginger into the brew
hmm
to be able to make it do
Oh,
some of the
okay. So
things
yeah,
that.
you strain it all out at the end
Yep.
after you boil it. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd probably help a lot. You actually might not. I might roll back that statement that you need to double the ginger. I think you're right. The first step to take would be just to leave the ginger in there.
Right. And look, I'm happy with this where it is. I would drink this anytime. This is one of my because you're right. I'm expecting more like a Canada Dry kind of ginger flavor, but with less sweetness when I have a ginger beer.
hmm
The only thing, like I had one that carbonated really, really well. Some of them didn't, some of them did. The one that I have right now doesn't have as much fizz to it, and that fizz adds something to the way that it hits your palate,
Yeah,
and
it
I
does.
liked it. I liked it a whole lot. So once I get the carbonation amount that's needed to make this happen, I'm gonna go back and do it. But I think and I'm gonna try ginger mead. That's my next thing to try, and I'm gonna basically do the same recipe, but I'm gonna add all the ginger into the mead
hmm
after I make it. And that's next week that I'm gonna like cook that and do it. And so then we'll probably talk about like the process of making that. And if but on the side note, I'm gonna make 2 batches of the ginger. I'm gonna make another ginger beer during that time, and I'm gonna see if it'll end up being like working out okay. So, you know the I'm fairly pleased with this, but I see a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like this is not bad. There's places you can improve, but this is I've had several different like home brewed ginger beers because a lot of people like making it. I've got a couple people kind of back towards where I grew up that have gotten into home brewing. Saw some of them before quarantine and they had ones to try. Not that great. A lot of people like to kind of just grate ginger and throw it in and not do any of the extra steps of like cooking it to help release the juices or cutting it finely to kind of help it brew faster. This is probably one of the better ones I've had made by like people I know. It just needs more heat. I'll try and find if I'm ever at Total Wine again. We've been avoiding it since we're all in quarantine. They used to carry one that I think was imported from Poland, maybe. That was really good. I mean, it is not trying to hide any of its ginger. It's maybe almost a little bit too much, but that's what like got me into it. It is just hot. I mean, it's almost like drinking some like if you've ever had like well, I know you have. I'm just more to the audience, I guess. If you've ever had like not so much Fireball, but other like high brand, really hard cinnamon whiskeys, they have like that sort of burn to them. Like they're not playing with the amount of spice that's in it.
one thing that I did at the beginning of this, and I've been kind of stirring it a little bit, is I dropped some honey into it, just like a tablespoon
Mm-hmm.
for a 12 ounce for 12 ounces. So not much. Maybe less than a tablespoon. It was just like a quick, kind of squirt of what I had in my honeybee jar here, and it it brings out some of the flavors, like some of the actual flavor of ginger in it, not the heat, but the flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And, but then it also adds like that kind of honey characteristic. So I'm hoping that the mead that I end up with will have a more pronounced version of that. Like it's fairly pleasurable. I like it a
Yeah.
whole lot.
Yeah, and I think it will. I mean, ginger and mead, that's a great combination because you already get a little bit of heat just from the mead itself because that's a difficult fermentation for the yeast. Having like a very natural addition to that is always really good. I'm sure that that's going to turn out pretty well. Even if it's not like exactly what you want, I have a hard time seeing a mead with ginger in it being worse than just a standard mead, you know? Like that's only good things being put into that pot.
And I know that I put baking the ginger mead as one of the topics of this episode. So I'm more like talking about the plans for making it,
Mhm.
because I wanted to see what I could do, and I was hoping that I'd get to it last night, but I just didn't end up being able to do it. Probably going to do it next week, and we'll revisit that topic again. But my plan is and I'll tell you kind of around what I'm planning on doing, and you can tell me what you think. Um, so this is all just like happening right now. So I'm planning on making it a little bit sweet, but basically using the same ginger recipe that I have, with some yeast holes, a little bit of maybe yeast nutrients. I don't know if I necessarily need it with the ginger in there, but I want to make sure I
Yeah.
give them because
And
it's
and
got a little bit of an antiseptic property to it.
yeah, and realistically, if you're putting in the hulls, you don't need it because that's what most yeast nutrient is anyway. It's just
Mhm.
ground up hulls.
Right. Well, I have a little bit of Fermax, so
Mm.
it's not all hulls.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, things like that. They'll also sometimes put in some. I've seen some that'll actually put in vitamin powders, but other ones will just put in
yeah,
different, either grains or other things to give them
yeah.
a little bit more vitamin. But yeah, hulls themselves will probably work fine if you don't want to add anything else.
So I'm going to use the same recipe that I used for the beer, and
Hmm.
then I'm going to put 3 pounds of honey in with it per gallon,
Yeah,
and probably going to use the Sweet Squeeze Florida honey because I
hmm,
bought some of that, and see if I can get some because that gives like a little bit of the one that I have is orange blossom honey. So it
yeah,
gives like a little bit of a citrus flavor on top of the other things. I think that'll nicely complement the flavors of the ginger beer,
yeah.
and
I was
people
going to suggest
will like
that.
that.
Is there ever a future that you don't put the lemon and lime in, but you put in more citrus honey?
I don't know. I mean, first I'm going to try going with what's working so far,
Hmm.
and then maybe the next gallon that I make will be just ginger mead, a orange blossom honey, and um, nutrients. And that's it, and see how that works out.
Yeah.
So I'm not 100% sure yet. But yeah, that's my plan, anyways. So there you go. Um, we'll see. I can make. I mean, I'll probably make like 3 batches of ginger mead over the next year, because I really like that, and it's easy to get ginger. I mean, ginger's so it's readily available everywhere,
Hmm.
right? Um, so let's talk about Ansible. Um, and well, first of all, tell me what you know about Ansible. I'm not 100% sure
Yeah,
what you
I
know.
actually know a decent amount textbook wise. I don't have too many things I actually try and automate with it, but it's one of those like hot topics in IT right now. So I've taken like some Pluralsight classes on it.
I've taken no classes on it. I I've got a lot of people that have told me, because we use a product called Network Service Orchestrator
Mm.
to do our automation for network automation, right? Um, but Ansible has some of the same functionality. It's not quite as robust
Yeah.
to do all of the things that we already do, but you can build some of those same automations out of it. Um, and so I have some Linux servers in my house. I have a DNS server, a Plex server. I have a couple other things that are run off of Linux. To be able to make sure that I've got some things that I want to have at home for just whatever it is, media or security or something like that. And so I wanted to make sure that those servers were kind of updated all at the same time, and even on a like automated schedule.
Hmm.
And so what I did is I was watching, I think, Network Chuck, and he started talking about Ansible, and then I was like, okay, well, let me dig a little bit more into this, because this sounds like maybe the product that I want to do, because I've tried a couple other things like some Bash scripting and some things like that, and they weren't quite as user friendly as I wanted it to be. What I found out was that it was fairly simple, easy for me to get the update to work. But then once I started going into like, well, how do I run this on a cron job? How do I get this to run so that I'm updating all of the Linux devices in my house, which I have like 4 computers that run Linux. Some have VMs on them, some don't, things like that. How do I make sure that my Docker container turns back up for my Steam cache library, my LAN cache library? How do I make sure all this works? And uh, really, what it comes down to is that um, you have to like make sure that all this like is kind of like tuned just right.
Hmm.
And I like basically broke my network a couple times doing this. The I did one where basically it will check to make sure that the box doesn't need to be rebooted after doing the update at like 3 a.m. And then if it does, it'll reboot it right then. Well, the problem is that even though I had my Docker container set to restart, it was only set to restart um, unless it was stopped. So like if it crashed or something.
Okay. Yeah.
But when the reboot happens, it counts as it being stopped. So it just didn't never turn back on. So my
Mm.
LAN cache server, my Nginx um, LAN cache, Docker container, never came back up. So my DNS was all down because it's like the upstream DNS to my Pi-hole. By the way, LAN cache plus Pi-hole is pretty awesome.
Mm.
Um, so just an aside from the whole Ansible thing, you want something that kind of makes your Steam library update faster. You want to make sure that if you have multiple Windows devices in your house, let's say your wife has like, a Windows laptop and your kids have a Windows laptop and you have a Windows laptop and you want to make sure that anything that gets on your home network gets its Windows update faster. You don't want to, I'm not even worried about conserving bandwidth, but I'm more like, I get a gigabit pipe to my house, and I'm not like rub anybody's nose in it, but that's just what I get, right?
Mm.
And I'm not as concerned about things like that, but sometimes it's still slow over wireless. And people in my family, they're like, "Oh, wires, they suck. I hate wires." Blah blah blah. And I'm like, "Well, you know what? I hate also hearing you gripe about how slow getting whatever update is, and you're sitting here and you're having to waste time."
Mhm.
So the Nginx thing is set to do Steam, Windows Update, um, all of the services like GOG and all that other stuff. Like that LAN cache thing is just it's awesome. It just it I'm blown away by how functional it is. I tried to get it to do it once before, and
Mhm.
in an earlier iteration, I had a lot of problems getting the other functions other than the Steam cache to work. But once they worked it out to where they just by default have all that set up, it's like a well-made French meal. It's
There you go.
delicious, delicious. Um, but back to Ansible. Or did you want to have any? You have any comments about that? I just started talking. I didn't give you a chance to talk.
No,
Sorry.
no. I mean, I think your experience is pretty typical, especially with Ansible. It's an amazing tool. I mean, I will say, I mean, it might not actually be, but in terms of like the people that talk about it and where you see people applying it, it is probably one of the most used automation softwares. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's a great tool. The only issue with it is it's extrapolating so much of the coding aspect that you can sometimes run into those problems, like with what you saw, because everything you're doing is now being translated into just like human readable stuff. You don't get to see what the machine sees, so you can't catch those problems as easily. I had a conversation with somebody about, between Ansible and SO once, and the kind of conclusion we came to is Ansible is easier. NSO can give you better results, but you have to work a lot harder at it. And so it just comes down to that. When you're making home projects, you probably don't want to put in as much work as you have to with some of these other automation suites. And even just in like even enterprise IT, if you're a mostly IT shop that doesn't have a whole bunch of development training, or even just like sometimes you almost need full-time developers if you're running really big automation suites in it, you know, it's kind of the industry leading tool for a reason. You can run into little problems with it, but it gets the job done.
I don't. So I think it's the industry leading tool because most people that run servers are also admins,
Yeah.
and so this stuff is this stuff is like geared towards developer admin type stuff, so like a DevOps type role. Um, I mean, I have no qualms about its drawbacks and its flaws from a person who both does DevOps, is an architect, and has to evaluate like technology. I would to run my network, I would not use Ansible, but I also wouldn't use some of the other tools that have been proposed to me. I'm not going to name what those are. But if I had a small shop where I didn't want to pay the fee for some of the licensings for other things, I would either buy something that's already at its heart made to be able to be automated, like Ubiquity or something like that. Or if I needed to have more control over the automation, I probably would use Ansible for automating most things. I think I could get by with doing network stuff. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that I would do it for most of it though. For most of my network stuff, I might use just Python scripting. I have experimented some with the Ansible network stack and things like that, and I'm not as fond of that. But I see why people use it because if I was a Linux admin, this is definitely the tool that I would use to update my servers to do like I wouldn't even worry with bash scripts. It would just be
Mm-hmm.
Ansible. There's some things Bash does great. Make some aliases, do some other things like that, make a couple of like scripts that I want to have. But when it comes down to it, Ansible is a great way to run that. One of the problems that I see though is if you have a mixed network environment, like so if you have like let's say you have an Ubuntu server for a web server that runs a certain type of software. And then also you've got a CentOS or Red Hat server that runs some software too. I can see that being a bit tricky. Um, so yeah, you know, I think as Chuck said, you need to learn Ansible right now. If you are an IT admin and you're not just a network administrator, or which everything's moving towards that, or you're a Linux admin and you don't really touch the network, you should definitely at least be well educated on it. I would encourage you, man, to go like spin up a server in some capacity, at home and like try to run a couple of servers or get yourself like an off-prem server
Mhm.
and play with it because I think you could do some really wicked stuff with that, knowing like with your talents and everything. Um,
Yeah, that's kind of the next step. I'm finishing up some of my network certs, and then I'm gonna have to have a long, hard look at the automation suites. Because on one
mhm.
hand, like Cisco's got some automation certs now, so that would be cool to grab. On the other hand, a lot of the stuff that are in those Cisco certs are Cisco products that aren't as widely represented in the market.
Yep.
So, like, knowing DNA really well, that's great if you're going to a Cisco shop, but knowing Ansible really well is valuable in a lot more places.
Yeah. Some of those dev certs though, they focus more on open source tools like the Cisco dev certs than
Mhm.
they give you like a rundown of DNA, like you have to know it and everything, but or even NSO, or vManage or something like that. But they also have some other things. I've started um, shifting focus on prepping for that dev cert when it comes to the CCIE. I think that's the first one I'm going to get.
Mhm.
Yeah, instead of doing the route switch, CCIE, I think that's where I'm going. We haven't talked about that. We probably should at some point in time, but I think that's where I'm headed because I've already got half of it. I might as well just finish the other half. And if the dev is the first thing that I get, I'm going to kind of be at the front or ahead of the game
Yeah.
with networking. So, yep. Got anything else you want to say about Ansible?
No, it's a good product.
Yeah, fun times. No Python, no Ansible, no other things. That's good things. So, have you watched Bill and Ted Face the Music yet?
I haven't. I haven't watched it, but when I saw them the topic, I went and like watched the trailers, and it looks like it'd be a fun thing to watch.
So, all right. So, I'm not going to give you any spoilers. It is just like at the trailers. It's like what happens when things don't turn out the way you expect them to. This movie, I'm sure it's not the best movie of the year or anything like that, right? But I feel like it was a really good kind of wrapping up that storyline,
Hmm.
and it had some really great moments. I encourage you. Have you watched the first Bill and Ted's?
No, so that was what I was going to ask. Is this something that I would benefit having seen the other movies from?
How are we friends? And I have not let you watch or forced you to watch Bill and Ted's. All right, so I have to find some way to get you my copy of Bill and Ted's, I guess, because I have the first two on Blu-ray,
Hmm.
and the second one it has some good moments, but you don't have to watch it necessarily to get what's going on. No, no, you do. You really need to watch it. You need to watch
Yeah.
the first two movies to get what's going on in the third movie because it references the first two. There's things you'll understand, but there's certain jokes and things like that you just won't get. Um, so I think you should watch those first two movies and then watch the third one. But basically, so Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is about two teenage boys who travel through time, and they've been told that the music that they play will unite the world, right?
Hmm.
And bring about peace and harmony and all these other things. No spoiler there. Second movie is kind of about them moving more towards fulfilling that destiny. And then the third movie is about them not having fulfilled that destiny and kind of how that affects their lives, right? So that's basically all the trailers will tell you all that stuff about the movies. What I will say is the first movie is excellent. Uh, the first movie's great. I love it. It's like a laugh out loud 80s, 90s kind of comedy, right? And it's got Keanu Reeves and like, it's just great. Everybody should watch it. Even if you don't like it, you should at least watch it once in your life, right?
Hmm.
Um, And the second movie, it's like if you're a big fan of the first movie, you'll kind of enjoy the second movie, but it's not perfect. And then the third movie though is really like kind of brings everything together, I guess is the best way to put it. So
Mm, okay.
um, I highly recommend it. Got it the first weekend it came out. My wife and I watched it, and we had some good times laughing about it. So it's not perfect. Like I said, it's not. You can tell that they made it during, like a time, like a lot of it was edited, and a lot of it was done during a time where, um, people weren't able to be around each other as much and everything. So
Mm,
there's some issues there, but most of it was shot before. So
okay.
yeah. Um, any questions you have about Bill and Ted's Face
No,
the
not yet. I looked up where I could watch the first two. It'll probably be a little while before I can grab those movies from you. And there's a couple places. They're on Stars. I've got a Star subscription, or I got my wife has a Star subscription. So maybe we'll hit those up next weekend.
That'd probably be a good idea. And then we can revisit the Bill and Ted's talk.
Hmm.
Have an episode dedicated to Bill and Ted's if you watch it next weekend. So Apple and Epic, they're fighting.
Yeah,
Have you heard about this?
I have. I've kept up with it a little bit. I'm not hardcore into it, but I've read quite a few articles from both sides about what's going on.
You know, dude, I thought you'd be all over this as much as you play Fortnite.
Oh yeah, I've seen someone play that game before. Who was it? I think it was Christian. Because they did that streaming stuff for a little while. I think I watched
Oh
them
yeah.
play it. I'll give Christian this. I screen cap one heck of a shot from him, like halfway across the map because there's like bullet curve and stuff in it.
Uh-huh.
Just nailed the dude. It was impressive.
Yeah, definitely not my type of game and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that I mean, all the big tech people are talking about this and everything.
Mm,
Just from my standpoint, one of the things that this shows is that you can position yourself um, to be an industry leader and stuff like that, but none of that stuff is going to last forever. Like eventually, you're going to have something that kind of pulls you down a bit,
yeah.
and um, this kind of epic fighting between Apple and Epic Games. Epic's the new kid on the block. They're doing things to kind of disrupt, Valve, and they're doing things to disrupt Apple, and they're doing things to disrupt Google. And, not long ago, Google was the new kid on the block, and they were disrupting Apple. But I think that this is one of those things where don't cheer for either side of this. The
Yeah.
only reason it's good is because they're fighting each other and they're not, doing crap to like take advantage of people because eventually they're going to be back to doing whatever it is that they want to do to charge you a ton of money for things that you don't really need.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they're basically fighting over who gets to take your money.
right.
It's good to watch them fight because it gets some highlighting on that these practices are happening. But at the end of the day, they're just fighting over who gets to be the person the microtransaction.
Yep, exactly. Or who gets to be the person that gets the lion's share of that money, or who gets to
Mm-hmm.
be the person that, um, is somehow in some way making the decisions about how those things are happening. Um, Now, I don't love Apple. I don't hate them. I mean, I have Apple computers at home. I have Macs, but I also have Windows machines and I have Linux. Most of the machines that I own are Linux machines. I have a one Mac that I own, and then I have a one Windows desktop that I own,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but everything else is pretty much runs off Linux and or specifically Ubuntu, and that's just the flavor that I prefer for whatever reason. It's got the software on it that I want, and I like using their servers and stuff like that. Um, CentOS is great. I don't want to say anything bad about that. So is Arch. Just have different, you know, uses. I have one Arch machine. I don't have a CentOS server, but it's because everything else is Ubuntu, and I want all the same software that I used to manage it to run off the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, so, anyways, just going back to that disclosure, in case someone's like, well, you hate on Apple all the time. I don't. I have some of their stuff. I use it. I enjoy it. One of the topics that we're going to talk about, I think, next is going to be my love of iPods. I love iPods.
Hmm.
Um, so like they make some good stuff. But all that said, they've kind of been a little totalitarian in the way that they deal with some things. Doesn't necessarily affect me because I'm not a developer or architect or anything like that that deals with their particular software, but it's still I don't love it. And they've made some decisions like, you know, having ARM chips instead of Intel chips that may make things more difficult for people as in certain areas like I don't know business areas where you want compatibility between different products, and so if
Yeah.
you're
For
going to
any
ARM
software
chips,
you have to actually compile.
yeah,
Anyone
exactly,
doing C stuff is going to not like that.
exactly. So I mean, all those things like I've got some complaints about them, but so the whole point that I'm getting here, like with this little bit of a rant, is Apple does some good things for consumers sometimes. Like they've got some pretty good privacy stuff. It's not perfect, but it's better than like say Google's,
Hmm.
and things like that. And their home automation stuff is actually their HomeKit stuff, or the not HomeKit, the Apple is it HomeKit? Um, I got to remember now because um, sitting here. Yeah, HomeKit. That's right. So Apple's HomeKit just had a moment where the HomeKit that works with Apple, whatever. That stuff is not something I know as much about as I do some of the other automation, but it is like so much better in some ways than other voice assistants and things like that. While at the same
Hmm.
time, because they're not willing to go to some of the lengths that other people do to like Google and those companies to encroach upon your privacies, they don't have as good of a voice assistant and things like that, right? So
Yeah.
um, I don't know that I really feel like Epic would be that responsible when it comes to things.
Yeah. I mean, Epic has taken some not what I would consider best practices before. Even some other game stuff is a little bit shady. They're trying to lock developers into using their platforms, the exclusive deals, and things like that. Um, they really, especially in the beginning, overboosted their numbers. They used to advertise that they sold so much more than Steam did. And what they really meant was when I think it was Metro, the second one,
Metro last long.
was starting to gain popularity, they made it exclusive. So they took it off of Steam and then put it only on their platform. And then
Yep.
said, look how many more copies it sold on our platform than Steam. It's like, well, yeah, because you took it off of Steam. You gave it a couple of weeks on one platform and then forced everyone over to another one when it was getting popular. So, that stuff's a bit shady. And even the stuff they're doing here with Apple. I mean, Apple overstepped. I mean, it's why they got ruled against in court. Um, they're being forced to reinstate the developer licenses and stuff like that. But they knew. I really think they knew what they were doing. They were banking on Fortnite was big enough that Apple wouldn't do anything about it when they broke the terms of service.
You know, I think they were planning on them breaking, like doing something about it though. I think they're trying to. I actually think they're trying to position themselves so that they become the gaming app store, like an alternative gaming app store
Mm-hmm.
for Google and for Android and iOS, basically. That's my thought on it, just based off of the
Mm-hmm.
things that they're doing. But we'll see. I mean, I can't. That's predicting the future, and I can only postulate. I can't
Yeah,
100% say that that's going to happen that way.
that's okay. The fun thing about fights between companies like this is once it hits the legal system, certain things just become public record. So I haven't got a chance to read them when I was doing my research on this. One of the more recent court filings, they've had to make like a whole bunch of emails public, including the emails back and forth between Epic and Apple before the licenses were revoked. So it'd be real interesting to read through those and see kind of how these companies are dealing with each other behind the scenes, where there's not as much PR in play.
Oh man, for real. So I don't really have anything else to say about that. Do you have anything else you want to say about that topic?
No, it's one of the more interesting tech battles I've seen, because a lot of times they come down to like very specific, like little technology things, like is this technically stealing the design off of, because Apple got in a big lawsuit with somebody else a couple years ago. I forget who. Of
Qualcomm, they got into a
maybe.
big thing with Qualcomm over stealing their designs and patents and things like that and giving them to Intel. That was one of the things that they got in trouble about, in the last couple of years.
Gotcha. I don't think that's what I'm thinking of. I remember it came down to being a really petty, and Apple lost. I was
Yep.
just like, did this phone look too much like an iPhone?
That's the Samsung,
Samsung. That's right. That's right.
Samsung lawsuit. Yeah.
Yeah, so like
It
that stuff's kind of boring because it's petty. Like this one, like more with the games and like a who is really in charge about what goes into the game is kind of more fun to see, because it is that battle of domain of like technically it's part of the program, but then just some random contract that nobody reads. Like that was the fun thing. I'm not sure if you've read through Microsoft's response to what's going on, but they took a really
into that.
interesting
Yep.
stance of just being like, you're just fighting over these contracts that nobody ever reads, no customer ever looks through it. I mean, even the developers, when you present them with an 800-page, this is, the terms of service to use my platform, nobody reads those things. Nobody can remember all that stuff. So it's just people playing around with these gotchas.
Exactly. And it's ultimately going to end up being, probably terrible for everybody that you're
Yeah.
fighting because it's going to cause some sort of problem that's horrible.
Yeah. Again, it's just people fighting of who gets to take the customer's money.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been episode 14 of the Beer and Broadband season 3, second half. We are going to have probably about 10 more in the second half, and then we'll be back around. So we're going to talk for a bit about some of the brews that I've been doing and maybe some of the other plans that we have to do stuff later on this year as far as brewing, and maybe some of Ricky's next brews. But other than that, we hope that we will see you next time, and maybe tweet at us or something like that. Give us some questions or thoughts on the episodes, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.